What if the scariest thing in a horror movie isn't the monster, but the space itself? The hallway that stretches too far, the road that doesn't end, the town where nothing moves. These places feel familiar, until something shifts, and that familiarity turns against you. I'm Justin Norton Kurtzen, your guide to the occult, the strange, and all things nerd horror. This is Beyond the Veil. In this video, we're breaking down 5 horror films that prove empty space can be the most terrifying thing on screen. But first, to understand why these films work, we need to talk about liminal spaces. Transitional environments like hotels, roads, airports, hallways, and suburbs. Places designed not for living, but for passing through. Normally they feel invisible and functional. But horror breaks that function, turning spaces meant for movement into places you can't leave. Your brain expects these environments to lead somewhere, to resolve into a destination. But when they don't, when they loop or empty out completely, that expectation collapses. And what you're left with isn't just emptiness, but a deeper disorientation. The sense that you're stuck between states with no clear way back or forward. Because in liminal horror, the fear isn't what's in the space. It's what happens when the space itself becomes the trap, and movement stops meaning escape and starts meaning imprisonment. And now, here are 5 films that use liminal spaces not just as settings, but as the source of horror itself. 1. The Shining. The hotel as a trap. If you want to understand liminal horror in its purest form, you start with The Shining, because the Overlook Hotel isn't just a setting, it's the entire mechanism of fear. Now, hotels, by their very nature, are liminal spaces. They're designed for temporary occupancy, places you pass through on your way somewhere else. Never meant to be permanent, never meant to hold you. You check in, you stay briefly, and then you leave. That's the function, the purpose. That's the expectation. But Kubrick takes that expectation and breaks it completely. From the moment the Torrance family arrives, the Overlook stops behaving like a place of transition and starts behaving like a place of containment. The hallways stretch on longer than they should, intersecting at strange angles, repeating the same visual patterns over and over again. Carpets, wallpaper, doors, creating a sense that you're moving but not actually going anywhere. The architecture itself becomes disorienting, subtly shifting your perception of space so that you can't quite map it in your mind. Rooms feel disconnected from the building they're in. Corridors loop back in ways that don't make logical sense. It's not just that the hotel's large, it's that it feels unknowable. And Kubrick reinforces this with repetition. Danny riding his tricycle through the halls, the rhythmic sound of wheels on carpet, then wood, then carpet again. The same turns, the same framing, the same motion, over and over, until movement itself starts to feel like a loop. Like no matter how far you go, you're still inside the same space, still inside the same system. But what makes the Overlook truly terrifying is that it doesn't just contain people. It changes them. It absorbs them. Jack doesn't just go insane in the hotel. He becomes part of it, as if the space itself is rewriting him, pulling him into its history, its patterns, and its cycles. The ghosts aren't just haunting the hotel, they're evidence of what happens to people who stay too long, who become trapped in a place that was never meant to hold them. And that's the key to its horror. the Overlook feels aware. Not in an overt supernatural way, but in something quieter, more structural. It watches. It repeats. It cycles. It takes people in and folds them into itself over and over again until they're no longer visitors. They're part of the architecture. Because in The Shining, the fear isn't that something is hiding in the hotel. It's that the hotel itself is what's haunting you. 2. Silent Hill, the town between worlds. If The Shining traps you inside a building, Silent Hill traps you inside a reality that never fully resolves. Because this isn't just a town. It's a place suspended between states, a space that never settles into a single version of itself. From the moment Rose enters Silent Hill, the world begins to feel unstable. The streets are empty, the buildings are intact but lifeless, and everything is swallowed in a dense, unrelenting fog that erases distance, erases detail, and erases any sense of direction. You can see just far enough to keep moving, but never far enough to understand where you are. And that's the first layer of its liminal horror. The fog doesn't just obscure the town, it empties it. It strips away context, leaving behind only fragments of a place that should feel lived in, but doesn't. There are no people, no movement, no signs of normal life continuing anywhere beyond your immediate field of vision. It's not abandoned in a way that suggests something happened. No, it's suspended, like time itself has stalled and never resumed. But Silent Hill doesn't stop there, because the town isn't just empty. The town shifts. Without warning, without explanation, it transitions into something darker, something industrial and nightmarish. The environment decays in real time. Metal replaces wood, rust spreads across surfaces, the air thickens, and suddenly, you're not just in an empty town. You're in a version of it that feels hostile, alive in a completely different way. And then, just as suddenly, it shifts back. There's no stable version of Silent Hill, no baseline reality to return to. Just layers, overlapping, bleeding into each other, existing simultaneously. And that's what makes it so effective as a liminal space. It's not just between places, it's between realities, functioning as a threshold you can cross into, but never fully out of. Because in most horror, the goal is to escape. You survive the house, you leave the woods, you outrun the threat. But in Silent Hill, the space itself removes that possibility. There's no clear boundary between safe and unsafe, no definitive version of the world to return to. Even when you think you've left, something's off. Something doesn't reconnect. And that's the deeper horror, the idea that once you've crossed into this space, you don't just leave it behind. It stays with you. It reshapes your reality, follows you in ways you can't fully see or understand. Because Silent Hill doesn't function like a place you visit. It functions like a boundary you cross. And once you cross it, you don't come back the same, if you come back at all. 3. Vivarium. Suburbia as a loop. If Silent Hill traps you between realities, Vivarium traps you inside something even more unsettling. A reality that looks completely normal, but has been stripped of all meaning. Because this isn't a decaying town, or a shifting nightmare world. It's suburbia. Clean streets, identical houses, neatly trimmed lawns, soft daylight. Everything designed to signal safety, stability, and control. The kind of place people are supposed to settle down, build a life, raise a family. It's the image of normalcy perfected. But the moment Tom and Gemma enter this neighborhood, something starts to feel off. The houses are identical, not similar, identical. Every street looks the same, every turn leads back to the same place. There are no landmarks, no variation or imperfections to anchor your sense of direction. And when they try to leave, they can't. No matter how far they drive, no matter how many turns they take, they always end up right back where they started. And that's where the horror begins to emerge. Not through violence, not through a visible threat, but through repetition. Endless, perfect, artificial repetition. The suburb stops functioning as a place and starts functioning as a system. One that doesn't respond to human behavior, one that doesn't allow deviation. It doesn't chase them, it doesn't attack them. It simply contains them. Because suburbia, in its ideal form, is already a kind of liminal space. It's designed to transition people into a stable life, a final destination, a place where everything is supposed to make sense. But Vivarium removes that resolution. It turns that promise into a loop. You don't arrive. You don't leave. You just continue, over and over again. And the longer you stay, the more the space reveals its true nature. Because in suburbia, the fear isn't that something is hiding inside the neighborhood. It's that the neighborhood itself is the trap. 4. It Follows. Suburban Limbo. If Vivarium traps you in a perfect loop, then It Follows traps you in something quieter, more subtle, a version of suburbia that feels just slightly out of sync with reality. At first glance, everything looks normal. Tree-lined streets, modest homes, quiet neighborhoods, the kind of places that are meant to feel safe, predictable, and lived in. But the way the film presents these spaces changes everything. Wide, static shots hold just a little too long. Backgrounds feel emptier than they should. Streets stretch out with barely anyone on them. And slowly, you start to notice that something's off. Not in an obvious way, but in a way that lingers. Part of that unease comes from time itself. It Follows exists in a kind of temporal ambiguity where nothing quite lines up. The houses feel older, the cars feel older, but the technology doesn't match any specific era. And characters use strange, unfamiliar devices. Clothing feels out of time. And the result is a world that feels detached from any clear moment, like it exists in a perpetual in-between, never fully anchored to the past or present. And that instability seeps into the environment, making even the most familiar spaces feel uncertain. But what makes this film so effective as liminal horror is how it uses space in relation to the entity itself. The threat in It Follows doesn't run. It doesn't jump out. It doesn't behave like a traditional monster. It simply walks, slowly, steadily, always moving forward. And because of that, the space around it transforms. Streets aren't just streets anymore, they're distances to be measured. Yards, sidewalks, hallways, doorways, every open space becomes a question. How long do you have before it crosses that distance? The horror shifts from confrontation to anticipation. You're not reacting to something happening, you're waiting for it to happen. Watching the background, scanning the horizon, trying to figure out if that distant figure is just a person or something coming closer. And because the environments are so open, so empty, there's nowhere for the threat to hide, but also nowhere for you to feel safe. 5. Lost Highway. Reality as liminal space. If the other films on this list trap you in spaces you can see, hotels, towns, suburbs, Lost Highway does something far more unsettling. It traps you inside a reality that won't stay consistent long enough to understand. Because David Lynch isn't just a director of horror, he's a master of liminal space experience. Someone who takes the idea of in-between and pushes it beyond physical space into something psychological, something that lives inside perception itself. On the surface, Lost Highway takes place in Los Angeles. Homes, highways, interiors, familiar environments that should feel grounded and real. But Lynch strips away that grounding almost immediately. Spaces feel disconnected from each other, like they don't belong to the same world. Interiors are too dark, too quiet, too empty. The highway itself, one of the film's central images, stretches endlessly into the night, illuminated only by headlights and dividing lines. With no clear destination, no sense of arrival, just forward motion without resolution. And that's the key. Nothing in Lost Highway resolves. Not the spaces, not the story, not even the identity of the characters. Time fractures, events repeat in altered forms. People change into other people without explanation. Scenes don't transition, they slip, like you've moved into a different version of the same reality without realizing it. The film becomes a kind of loop, but not a clean one like Vivarium. This is a fractured loop, where pieces don't quite fit together, where continuity breaks down entirely. Which means the liminal space here isn't just the highway, or the house, or the city. It's reality itself. Everything feels transitional, like you're constantly moving from one state to another, but never arriving anywhere stable. Identity becomes fluid, time becomes unreliable, and space becomes disconnected. And the more you try to make sense of it, the more it resists, as if the film is actively denying you a coherent structure to hold on to. And that's where Lynch's true liminal horror lives, not in any one location, but in the space between understanding and confusion, between identity and loss of self, between one moment and the next. Because when reality itself becomes unstable, there's nowhere left to stand. Lost Highway proves that the scariest liminal space is your own reality. When you step back and look at all 5 of these films together, a pattern starts to emerge. One that has nothing to do with monsters and everything to do with space itself. Each of these environments removes something fundamental that we rely on to feel grounded in the world. They remove direction so you can't orient yourself. They remove meaning so the space no longer serves its purpose. And most importantly, they remove escape so movement no longer leads anywhere. It just keeps you inside the system. And that's what defines liminal horror at its core. It's not about being safe. It's not about being in immediate danger. It's about being caught in between those states, where nothing is actively attacking you, but nothing's letting you go either. The rules don't fully apply, but they're not completely broken. Reality hasn't collapsed, but it no longer feels stable. You're left in a space that feels real enough to trap you, but not real enough to trust. Because these films aren't just showing you unsettling locations. They're showing you what happens when the world stops resolving, when movement doesn't lead forward, when space doesn't behave, when reality itself becomes a threshold you can't cross. These films don't trap you in a place. They trap you in between places.
Horror.
Please like and subscribe for more nerd horror. And we also have another channel called Nerd Horror Stories, a twice-weekly anthology horror series that tells tales of the supernatural, psychological, and unexplainable. So please check out Nerd Horror Stories.